Hey everybody. I am going to go over the engine breakdown that we did in lab yesterday. So for those of you who are doing the virtual lab, you want to pay attention to this. And then those of you who were in class is kind of a little refresher. So um, in class, we're working on this GCB 190. So I'm going to go over all of the different components as we go through and kind of work from there. So to start off, there is a breakdown guide that is in the modules. So you can open that and follow along as I go through this. One thing about this Honda is everything is 10 millimeter. So we're going to use certain tools and I'll explain things as we go. So the first thing that we're going to do is take off our air cleaner cover. So there to the right is the air cleaner cover. Right here, I'm talking about, the certain tools and it being a 10 millimeter only. So first thing we're going to do is take off our air cleaner cover, and you'll see here to the right is right here. It's just 2 clamps. We'll pop that off. Okay, and then we'll take our air cleaner out. We'll inspect our air cleaner. Should be clean on the inside and dirty on the outside. This is a little bit dirty air cleaner, but we don't use it really in service other than for our class. So there's a little bit of oil on there that you can see as far as that goes. So from there, we're going to take off our rewind starter, and you'll see here in a second what that looks like as far as our rewind starter goes. And it's this component here. And so we'll take a 10 millimeter and we'll loosen these screws or these nuts, and we'll take that air cleaner off. That rewind starter. The tool that I'm using is called a nut driver. So it's kind of like a screwdriver, but for nuts, it kind of has a socket on the end of it, so that you can loosen loosen parts as needed. So our rewind starter comes off, really easy. Main reason why they call it rewind starter is when you pull the rope, it rewinds itself back up. In the old days, you used to have to tie a rope around the crankshaft and yank on it, and hopefully it'd start. And if it didn't start, you'd have to rewind your own rope and everything to get it to go. Next things up is our blower housing. So the blower housing comes off real easily. It just pulls off. You do have to disconnect the fuel line because the fuel tank is connected to the blower housing on here. So you take a pair of pliers. I know it's kind of hard to see, but you take a pair of pliers and you pull that hose off. Paying attention to whether or not there is some gasoline inside the tank. Next up, as far as taking apart our engine, one thing we got to keep in mind is all the components, the screws, the bolts or fasteners, nuts go back on to where we took them off. Okay, so you can see here that I'm putting those back on. It helps as far as when I go to rebuild it, doing those things. So keep that in mind. Anytime you work on an engine, just put the screw or bolt back in to where you took it out from. Next up is our air cleaner base. It's also the studs that tighten in the carburetor. So we're going to loosen those out and take the air cleaner base off. The gaskets and everything are going to fall down from there. So we're going to take that off. Okay. There is a breather hose connected to the backside of our air cleaner base. So we want to keep in mind on that aspect what that component is. And then your carburetor is attached to 2 links. One is for the choke and one is for the governor. Those are the gaskets that I'm showing to the class, and the air cleaner spacer, the carburetor spacer. First thing you're gonna have to do is take the hose, the fuel line off of the fuel shutoff valve. And you're gonna take that hose off. You're gonna loosen the screws that do the control module. And you can see that those links are still connected to the carburetor. And so what you'll see here is we're gonna take off the hose. Use a pair of pliers. And then a flathead screwdriver to loosen the hose off the barb. We're able to take that hose off gradually. It can be kind of a pain to get those off. Hose comes off. That link comes out of the carburetor. That's our choke link. And then our governor link and spring will need to come off as well. Okay, so that's what our carburetor looks like. You will keep that in mind as far as parts go. Our governor link comes off and the spring. And then moving on into other components on our engine. And so it's all about external components. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're going to flip the engine over. And take that's the control module we're gonna take off, but we're gonna flip the engine over back to its flat position. And then we're gonna work on taking the muffler off. So there's a heat shield around the outside of the muffler, and then the muffler itself. So we loosen those screws, work our way through. Always remember when you're loosening, it's always typically lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, meaning that when you wanna loosen things, you turn the fastener to the left, and then when you wanna tighten it, you turn the fastener to the right. Take off our heat shield, and then now our muffler needs to come off, and you can see there's two screws there in the muffler itself that we're gonna have to remove. We're putting our muffler, our heat shield screws back into the block, and then we work on taking our muffler off. The muffler protects us from loud engine noise. So it's a kind of a small muffler, so these engines are a little loud in that sense. Take our muffler off, and then we're gonna take our muffler gasket off, which is that shiny piece of material. Those gaskets used to be made out of asbestos. Now they're not, because asbestos causes cancer. So you want to keep in mind when you're working on old engines, sometimes those gaskets are made out of asbestos. And we're going to flip our engine back over, and we're going to work on taking off our magneto, our armature magneto. So we unplug the spark plug, and that is our armature magneto. And so we'll loosen one of the screws. And then, ooh, wrong video. Let me find the other video. Oh, not that one. Sorry about that. There we go. We took one of the screws out one of the screws out of the armature, which is right here. The other one has a stud on it. These studs strip out really easily. Honda, the material they use is very soft. The top of that stud is actually an 8mm, but they strip out really easily. So you want to keep in mind, we're using some tools that aren't typically used. So this is a pair of locking pliers that we are going to loosen those screws off with, or that stud off with. So you tighten it down, not on the threaded part, but on the hexagon where my fingers are. And then you clamp on it and then loosen. And once you break it free or break it loose a little bit, you can take that stud off. I put the stud back in. That's looking at my armature magneto. I put the stud back in and the screws, and then move on to the next part. And the next part that we're going to take off is actually our flywheel nut. And so you have to use a couple of tools to do this. One is a flywheel strap, and the other one is a flex handle, also called a breaker bar. It uses a size 19 socket. Okay, so that is our flywheel strap. You'll see that I put it around the flywheel. And it uses force or resistance at the edge to put pressure on the flywheel to hold it in place. So it works really well in this sense. So flywheel strap are directional, so you can only use it depending on which direction you're going to be tightening or loosening your nut. So we put this on like so. And then I grab my 19 millimeter socket and flex handle. That goes on. Okay. Flex handles give us a little bit more force, a little more tension because of how long the handle is. So then I squeeze those two together, it breaks free or breaks loose, and then we loosen the flywheel nut off. We'll go back. Loosen the flywheel nut off. Take my flywheel fan off of the engine. And then now my flywheel is going to be pretty much locked in on the okay, sorry about that. Going back to where we are. So the flywheel has a tapered shaft on it. And so to take that off, you have to use a flywheel puller or a gear puller, or I'm going to teach you a little trick on tapered shaft type things on how to take these components off. But these things are tightened on pretty well. You can't pull it off by hand. So you could use a couple of tools, and I'll show you. One is with 2 hammers. Yeah. So I put one hammer on the backside, and then I take another hammer, and then I hit it. What happens is it breaks it free to where you can take that flywheel off. Another type of tool you could use if you need it is a gear puller or a flywheel puller. This right here, what I'm going to show you is a gear puller, and it would fit around the flywheel, and then you would tighten that center stud and it would pull it off of the engine. So a little bit easier if you just do the little trick of using the hammer like so. Put that on, hit that really hard, and then it will break loose like so. Yeah. Moving on. Keep in mind on the flywheel, you notice this green thing here, that's a magnet. And so you always want to be careful of that, not to break that off. So if you do use a puller, make sure it's on the other aspect of the flywheel, not on the magnet itself. Because those magnets are screwed on and then also glued on, and they could break really easily. So now we're going to take off our cylinder head cover, also called a rocker cover, could be also called a valve cover. A lot of different names depending on manufacturer. So still 10 millimeter, we loosen those screws. Honda doesn't do a lot of gaskets on these engines, so they will use gasket maker. It's basically like a glue that sticks on there. So we have to use, and this is the only time I'll ever tell you to do something like this. Typically you would want to use some kind of putty knife, but Honda actually says to use a flathead screwdriver and put it in between the two surfaces and pull it back to where you allow air or oxygen to meet the gasket, and it breaks it free. So you take a hammer, fit that in there, and that pops off. And you'll notice on the inside there's some gasket maker, and that's what Honda recommends to use on this engine. Okay. So we're still now moving into some internal components. We're going to start looking at the valve components. So if we look here, there at the top, we're going to pull our rocker arms first. So we need to rotate our crankshaft to where there's no tension on our rocker arms. And you can see what I'm doing there is I'm turning the crankshaft until zero tension on there. And once I find the part that I want to put it on, I'm going to pull these pins and I'm going to pull the rocker arm off. Okay. So going back, put the pin back in, go the other side, and I'm going to pull this rocker arm out. This is an overhead cam engine, so it's a little bit different. There's no push rods, there's no tappets or anything. Rocker arms directly up at the top with the cam. The other thing this engine has is a timing belt, which is not typical of small engines, but on this engine it is. So you're going to want to take and loosen that belt off of that gear, and we pull that back. So use a little screwdriver, loosen that belt, and then now our cam is now loose. So we got to pull that cam out. So there's a little stud that goes through the center. And so you're going to pull that stud out with a pair of pliers. Comes out just like so. Okay. And then I'm able to pull my cam out. And that's the cam gear with the cam lobe. And then I'm going to push the belt in down because when put the stud back in so I don't lose the stud. So the belt sits down below at the bottom. So those are the external components of our engine. The next recording I'll post is the internal components. There were a couple internal components on this engine like we just saw right now, but this is simple, basic starting breakdown. So if you have any questions, just let me know. And we'll stop here. I kind of give you a chance to look through that and then wrap your mind. And then on the next recording, I will post the internal components of the engines. And so it'll give you an idea of how to take all of that apart. So like I said, always let me know if you ever need help or if something doesn't work right. And we will work out with whatever problem or issue, or I'll work to answer your question.